Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. You might notice, if you pay attention to those sorts of things, that for the past few weeks, this slot in the schedule was taken by Sideways by Rex Pickett. But as I thought over that review, I realized that because I really love that book, I wanted to approach it in a different way, so I put it on the back burner for the time being. Instead, I wanted to celebrate the good news that came out of the Star Trek convention in Las Vegas. Initially, I wanted to look at the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard, to celebrate the news that Patrick Stewart is set to reprise his role for a new CBS All Access series in the near future. But then I thought, that would be a lot more fun to do as a celebration of the series premiere whenever it happens, so I spiked it. Then I figured it was finally time to look at the Children of Kings because of the new stuff we learned about Discovery's second season, which will heavily feature Captain Christopher Pike and his Enterprise. But then I figured that also might be better for the premiere of that season, so it went on the back burner too. And then I figured there's a third novel already out and a few new ones planned, including one that features the greatest character in all of Star Trek, Sylvia Tilly, so I figured it's finally time to check out the second novel, Drastic Measures. Now, while the first novel release took place a year prior to the start of Discovery, focused on Burnham and was an overt crossover with Pike's Enterprise, including Number 1 and Spock in the action, Drastic Measures takes place a decade prior to the start of Discovery, and is a more subtle crossover, featuring commanders and future captains, Philippa Georgiou and Gabriel Lorca, investigating the Tarsus 4 massacre perpetrated by Kodos the Executioner, which was one of the formative moments in the life of James T. Kirk. Is it as good as the first novel and expands on a less explored area of Star Trek? Or is trying to transplant new characters into an established event just making it more confusing? I'll be the judge, jury, and executioner. This is Drastic Measures. The cover is, well, it's better than the first one. In this, we get a proper space background with stars and nebulae behind the two protagonists, Georgiou and Lorca, who is carrying a phaser rifle. What's funny about this is, and spoilers if you haven't gotten through all of Discovery's first season yet, but the Lorca we saw in the first season is not the Lorca we'll see in this book. Mostly. The Lorca in this publicity shot is technically Mirror Lorca, who replaced Lorca prior to the start of Discovery, so technically one of the main characters does not appear on the cover of this book. At least according to the way that the official wiki makes its character pages. Other than that, we have the logo, which I love, lens flare and all, the title in the same font, and the bottom tells us that not only is this based upon the explosive new series on CBS All Access, but it was also written by Dayton Ward, which, if you remember way back in 2013, I reviewed an original series novel that he wrote. God, that episode was terrible. Please don't watch it. It's really bad. But that novel was really good, so I have high expectations for this one. Let's get to the story. As I stated earlier, the book focuses on the immediate aftermath of the Tarsus 4 massacre. Tarsus 4 was a human colony that was far from the Federation and Starfleet's reach, though Starfleet did have an outpost there. After a different colony has problems and their refugees are moved to Tarsus 4, there's an ecological disaster where a fungus infects their food supplies. The book is similar to Carrie in the regard that there are excerpts from an in-universe book written about the massacre interspersed with the story. story. After the disaster, the governor, Gisela Ribeiro, is deposed by angry colonists and replaced by a scientist that not many people know about, Adrian Kodos, who has some manner of experience with crisis management. His first act is to institute martial law and then raid the nearby Starfleet outpost, headed by Commander Gabriel Lorca, killing a few of his fellow officers, which doesn't sit well with Lorca, who interrogates the two raiders, showing that he's got the same sort of gray morality as the Lorca we saw throughout Discovery's first season. They reveal that they were sent to survey their food and weapon stashes, info that Lorca shared with Ribeiro, and offered to gladly share their food as much as he could. Because why share the food when you can just take it? Lorca leaves them prisoner until he can figure out what's going on and gets a communication from Baylana, a civilian colonist living in town who Lorca is quite fond of, who tells him of a meeting at the amphitheater in town that night and invites Lorca to attend with her. He plans with his remaining colleagues to do just that. Meanwhile, Philippa Georgiou, aboard the USS Narbonne, pending a posting on the USS Defiant, is told by the Narbonne's captain, Corapati, that there's some sort of issue on Tarsus 4, and they haven't had any contact since the fungus hit, and Starfleet is worried. The Narbonne is, and say it with me now, the closest ship in range, so they're tasked with being the first responders, while Starfleet gets supplies together. Lorca makes it to Baylana's apartment, but she's already left, and he watches the speech on TV. And if you've seen The Conscience of the King, you already know what's coming. Kodos executes half the colony to extend supplies, keeping people of his choice alive. Has someone checked if he has some sort of weird brain parasite that'll turn him into Dread Knight from the old Iron Man cartoon? Lorca's pissed and plans to make Kodos pay for his crimes, while Kodos, realizing what he has done, goes on the run with his people, trying to plan an escape from the planet. Lorca goes on the offensive, trying to find any and all people involved to get to Kodos, who also deleted all evidence of his existence from the computers, finding a way to get a communication sent out to the Narbonne and let them know about the situation. The USS Narbonne arrives and starts to do damage control, finding Ribeiro and her people and releasing them to get the colony back on track. One of Ribeiro's aides tries to assassinate her and the Starfleet people with a grenade, but Lorca rushes in and deactivates it at just the right time. The rest of the novel is part mystery, as Lorca and Georgiou do their parts to solving the colony's problems, including a bit in the hospital where Georgiou bonds with a little girl who was injured, and then finds a young man visiting his friend who saw Kodos' face on the monitors, a young man by the name of James Tiberius Kirk, and hopefully find Kodos, while we also get asides to not only the reference material about the events, but also bits where we follow Kodos and his men in their escape preparations. Eventually, Starfleet finds one of Kodos' security specialists, Simmons, hiding out at his girlfriend's apartment in the city, and not with Kodos' cabal, having been betrayed by Kodos during the amphitheater ambush, but having escaped. Turns out the guy has morals and couldn't go through with Kodos' orders. His phaser when he fought Lorca was set to stun too, showing that he didn't want to kill anyone. Didn't stop Lorca from beating the crap out of him, though. In Lorca's defense, he realizes that he was out of line and says as much to Georgiou when she calls him on it. Lorca plans to use Simmons to either guide them to Kodos' sanctuary in the mountains, or to use them as bait for Kodos. Lorca doesn't mind which one they use. Georgiou initially wants to remove Lorca because he's too emotionally attached to the case, but he insists, and he promises to bring Kodos back alive, because that's the only way to get justice for his fallen comrades in Baylana, though he remarks to himself that if Kodos fights back and tries to kill him, he won't think twice. Kodos has eyes everywhere, though, so he's privy to the knowledge that Lorca's coming for him and is scrambling to organize a ship off-planet. Georgiou's people, including Lieutenant Jan, a Betazoid, are taken hostage by Kodos' people trying to steal a ship, and Georgiou goes after them, but the Narbonne is hit by a power surge set up by Kodos' people. Lorca catches up to Kodos, firing at them from a distance, but they escape, and Kodos tries to off them in their sleep, but Lorca catches his agent, giving them a new lead towards Kodos. Georgiou and the Narbonne discover a method to take remote control of the transport that was stolen with Jen inside, but they can't do it if the comms are down, so Georgiou comes up with the solution. Beam herself into the transport and she'll re-enable the comms. Sounds familiar, but I have no doubt that this plan will work way better than the next time she's gonna try it. She starts but gets into a fight with Kodos' people and wins, giving the Narbonne the ability to remote control the transport. Lorca gets close to Kodos, but there's a firefight and a thermite grenade explosion, and Lorca is nearly killed, and Kodos is presumed dead. The Enterprise shows up, led by Captain Robert April, and brings food and medical attention for the colony. Kodos' body is discovered and DNA maxed, although it's not really him. He switched his DNA records with one of his colleagues, and he escapes in the chaos to become Anton Caridian, keeping only a collection of Shakespeare with him, foreshadowing his future as an actor. Georgiou and Lorca travel to Starbase 11 and talk a little bit about their mutual experiences, and Lorca ruminates on a fortune he found in Baylana's apartment from a cookie he gave her after a date. Hate is never conquered by hate. Hate is conquered by love.
Hate is always foolish, and love is always wise.
Which matches what Georgiou's feelings on the matter were. Side note, I know that it's important for the Doctor to be someone other than a white dude, but I think that Jason Isaacs, after his stellar performance on Discovery, would make a really good Doctor. Years later, Georgiou reads the manuscript of the reference book, written by that girl she befriended in the hospital, and at the very end of the book, after even the author's note and acknowledgments, a man sits alone in a prison cell in a dark and twisted universe, being kept prisoner for some strange reason, and he reads a very special fortune. Hate is never conquered by hate. Hate is conquered by love. The book has some good expansion of Lorca's character. It shows that he has the same sort of grey morality that his Mirror Universe counterpart had. Reminds me of that one Wonderella comic where Wonderella, since she's barely a good guy in the Prime Universe, is barely a villain in the Mirror Universe, meaning that they're basically the same. Lorca's shown to be the same way, and I have no doubt that if he had lost important people during the Klingon War, he probably would have done a lot of the same things that Mirror Lorca did, which is good to know because it means all that time we spent with Lorca wasn't a total waste when it went out the window when his identity was revealed. On the same token, we get even more about Georgiou, and it shows that her process is always to help the people first. Lorca was going for vengeance, didn't even search out Governor Ribeiro. He went straight for finding Kodos. Meanwhile, Georgiou and the Narbonne's first acts were to help the colonists get back on track. This is consistent with the way that she acted in the first 2 episodes of Discovery, and consistent with Burnham's recounting of her behavior. It's also consistent with the way she acted in the first book. Pike, being an older, grizzled captain, was more so focused on Starfleet's regulations, but Georgiou wanted to focus on saving the people. We're also shown how much of a competent commander she is, being cool under pressure, which, like the Battle of the Binary Stars, sets her apart from Lorca in the same way it set her apart from Burnham. Kodos is basically how he was portrayed as Anton Caridian in the original series episode that originated him. He shows remorse, but also believes that at the time it was the only solution, and wants to wipe out any knowledge of himself because of that remorse. Of course, there's that old adage from Jake Peralta to remember in cases like this.
Cool motive, still murder.
I also love how they handled the Kirk cameo. There's a lot we don't know about Kirk's early life in show, so any time that they show it, they're treading a very delicate line. And this is charming and not too much. Kirk was one of the only people to know what he looked like and snuck into the hospital to find a record on Kodos. Exactly in character for Kirk. I can see the boy we saw in this book will eventually grow into a captain himself, just as Georgiou thought. The supporting cast, Lorca's crew, Georgiou's crew, are also great, though I won't go into a lot of detail on them because they're not really the focus of the book. I will say that it introduces a Betazoid character in the original series era, which is awesome, and shows a unique character, Jen, that I wish we'd get to see more of, because it's interesting to see a full Betazoid and how different it is with the mind reading being less known about by their colleagues. But Kodos' followers, for the most part, are kinda reprehensible, or at the very least afraid of the consequences. But considering that they were willing to kill more after they killed, I'm gonna go with reprehensible. I also love that Ward gave us that bit at the end with Prime Lorca. He didn't have to give us that bit, that glimmer of hope at the end, but I am so glad that he did, and I hope it goes somewhere. The pacing is great. Considering that we're following 3 distinct stories, none of them ever lose their steam, and they progress at the pace that they should in Star Trek. It also develops at a good pace. Nothing ever happens too rushed or too slow. The story is exactly as long as it needs to be. Lorca gets a good progression where he has time to ruminate over his strong feelings about his lost crew and B'Elanna, while Georgiou gets to show her command skills and even learns a few things over the course of the story. What I really like about the book is the same sort of stuff I liked about Carrie, the reference material, which, the kicker is that it's written by that little girl that Georgiou befriended in the hospital, is a perfect palate cleanser in between the action. It works as a break because it gives us insight into parts that Lorca and Georgiou aren't involved with. And, like Carrie, it does more than an omniscient narrator ever could. I also love it because it reminds us that the story didn't just end when they left. There were a lot of pieces to pick up. Injuries like Tommy Layton, consequences like all those deaths that followed Caridian around, and the book expertly doesn't actually end. There's a good sense of suspense, too, even though we already know the stakes when it started, ideally. Most Star Trek fans who read it are gonna know what happened to Kodos, but even knowing that, it doesn't quite fall into the Agent Carter pitfall, because while we know Lorca, Georgiou, and Kodos survived to have more adventures, that doesn't hamper the suspense, because even knowing that, I was still on the edge of my seat. Agent Carter was fun, but knowing that Peggy, Jarvis, and Howard Stark lived on until their eventual deaths made it so that the parts meant to be really suspenseful weren't, because they had main character shields and couldn't die. It also made it so any side characters couldn't really be invested in because they could die at any moment. In this, they do a good job of making it so that you can get invested in side characters and still worry about the main ones. Overall, the book is fantastic, and if you're a fan of Discovery, you should have already read it. Not only is it worthy as a Star Trek book in general, but it really helps inform on the big twists of the first season, and gives insight to characters we're unlikely to see on the show proper anytime soon. So I highly recommend it. If you're not a Discovery fan and are one of those people opposed to it for whatever reason, I would still recommend it if you like the original series and want to explore this aspect of Kirk's life, because as far as we know right now, this is the closest to canon, since the writer's room is very hands-on in regards to the novel series, which for Discovery is good because it means, like Star Wars, we have multiple facets of the production working in tandem. And if you're not a Star Trek fan, that seems unlikely because you made it to the end of a Star Trek video, but then it might not be for you. Otherwise, I can't recommend it enough. I loved it. Not quite as much as the first one, since that one had the novelty of being the first one, and I doubt I'll love it as much as the Tilly one, but I definitely think it's a great book. Still waiting for one about Stamets and Culber, though. In the meantime, if you'd like to see more of the Literary Lair, you can hit that subscribe button, and if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comment section below. Oh, and if you want to be notified of new uploads, you can hit that bell icon. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet, and maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. Next week is a video that's been a long time coming. In fact, too long a time coming. See you next time. I also love how they handle the Kirk cameo. Oh, son of a... bitch, my phone's in my pocket. I never put the timer on. Fuck. Okay, I'll do this and then I'll pause it. I don't think it's been that long.